That's the million-dollar question, Alison. I think the question now is what happens next, and I think it's going to be something that the Americans will have to discuss in conjunction with the Israelis, because of course this is not just an American issue now, it's also an Israeli issue. The Israelis wanted the Americans to come into this war, into this situation, and Netanyahu has gotten his wish, but it has been signaled to the Iranians by the Americans that this was a limited strike. It was confined to those nuclear sites, and that there were no further strikes planned, and that they are not looking for regime change. Now, of course, that stands at odds with some things that we've heard from some Israeli officials over the course of the last few days, but the Americans really are pushing the idea that this should be the end to it. Donald Trump numerous times has said this should be the end, that this should be the end of the war, and he's also even threatened Iran that if they do retaliate, then the consequences for that will be severe. He said in his address at 10 p.m. Eastern Time from the insides of the White House, he said, "This cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran, far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight was the most difficult of them all by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them could be taken out in a matter of minutes." So Donald Trump here trying to use, once again, his peace through strength narrative that he's been using for the last few years. But of course, he's also now shown that these are not just words. He is prepared to back them up with strikes, as the Iranians saw to their detriment this evening.
And Fraser, what more do we know about how these strikes were actually carried out?
I think the interesting thing was that we saw some reporting early on Saturday that there were some 6 B-2 bombers that had left their airbase in Missouri and were heading to Guam. Now, for those planes to have made it from Missouri all the way to Iran, that's a flight time of around 30 hours, which would have included numerous refueling stops in the air, which was not feasible. Of course, the timeline just doesn't check out, so it appears that that was actually more of a red herring more than anything else, and that there were actually a more secretive set of planes that left and flew eastwards instead of westwards, a flight time of around 15 or so hours, which much better fits the timeline. And this also backs up reporting that we have in the last couple of days that numerous refueling ships, airplanes, if you will, that were being sent across different parts of the Europe and further in towards the Middle East, which would effectively provide an air bridge of refueling for these B-2 bombers, the planes that we know were used in these strikes. And it's important because these planes, the B-2s that the US has, are the only planes that are capable of carrying those 33,000-pound munitions with the bunker busters, which were used to strike the facility at Fordo, which is buried deep inside that mountain. Now, we know, of course, that these bunker busters were efficient, but it turns out that 6 of them were used on Fordo alone, which means that there were 3 B-2 bombers just on that one air mission, because each plane can carry 2 of these big MOP bombs. And then the other 2 sites, Natanz and Isfahan, were both struck also with B-2s, but with Tomahawk missiles. Interesting reporting, just quickly, Alison, as well, is that these Tomahawks cannot penetrate the ground as much as those big MOP bombs, but in fact some of the tunnels at Isfahan are actually harder to reach than parts of Fordo. That is some reporting that came out of Fox News's national security correspondent from the Pentagon, and it's unclear whether that tunnel, which is being used to store the precursor material for uranium enrichment, was actually struck or not. But of course, the battle damage assessment that the US will conduct to determine just how successful these strikes were is still ongoing. But for now, Donald Trump says that these sites were written off the map.